Hello and welcome to MalMakes. Today I'm going to be painting an underwater scene from inside. This is the full version. If you're interested in the time-lapse, you can click on the card here. Otherwise, let's get started. Like always, I've gone ahead and done a sketch, and I only kind of drew in the main parts here so I knew kind of the main composition of my piece. Now the background isn't as important because it's very blurred out and it's those offices that are underwater, so I just need to make sure my background is kind of these straight lines with some windows, and they're just going to kind of be very blurry back there. Now I noticed that when I drew this first, it wasn't rotated up enough for the boy to kind of be looking at her, so I made myself a little note. But the thing I want to make sure is I'm really concerned about kind of painting in this light source. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to a test canvas, which is just a canvas board that I pretty much use to test everything, and kind of just play with some of the colors and make sure I have everything right before I start doing it on the actual canvas. So here's my test board, and you can kind of see different paintings I've tested things on. I have Skyrim in the background, the Mother 3 one, and a little bit of the Shadow of the Colossus painting, and then the trees from the Shoshone painting. So what I'm going to do is over here with some of this already bluish gray color, I'm just going to use some more and kind of just paint some blurry lines with it to kind of mimic the underwater offices, just so I can start to get an idea of what that'll look like, and then I'm going to try some different ways of putting light sources on top. So I finished doing my test, and the reason I did this is because I like to paint in a certain order. I like to paint all of the background, and then all of the midground, and then all of the foreground, and then kind of cover each other up. Like these trees are covering up part of this mountain, and I like how that works. It kind of works best for like how I think and how I can put the painting together in front of you guys. So what I tried to do is I did my background first, and then I tried all of these different things to see what's going to give me the best result. So you can see some of them worked a lot better than others. Some of them just totally covered the entire background and it didn't work. So I'm going to go over them really quickly. The first thing I tried was using the heavy body zinc white. Now I use the zinc white because it's transparent. If I compare it to something like the titanium up here, you can see that these lines get covered a lot more, so the titanium's a lot more opaque, which is why I thought I'd try the zinc white, but that one didn't work. That one ended up being this beam of light here. It's just too opaque still, and you can't even see any of the background values behind it, so I didn't like how that looked. The second thing I tried was the fluid zinc white. Now this is kind of a heavy cream consistency or a syrup consistency, at least compared to the zinc white here, and I mixed in a little bit of blue with it just to kind of see what it would do, and that one's down here. Now you can kind of see some of this weird texture I was getting from the paint below it, so it didn't really apply to the canvas in a smooth way like I'm trying to get. So I didn't like how that one looked either. So the third thing I tried was using some of the golden mediums, and this one is GAC 100. It's kind of like a clear paint. So if you kind of take this and put a lot of the pigment in it, you'll start to get some paint kind of like you have here. So I mixed these two together with just a little bit of this, and I tried that up here, and it worked pretty good. I was pretty happy with it. I was getting a little bit of like weird streaking, so there's like a kind of bit of a lighter part here, and there's like a darker bit here. Now this isn't the background that I'm trying to show through. This is just the GAC 100 and the zinc white not quite working like I want them to. So the last thing I tried was the acrylic glazing liquid, and this one is in satin. And then I tried that here. So you can see this is a lot smoother, at least compared to the GAC 100, and you can definitely see the background value changes behind it, so I really liked how that worked. So I think I'm going to be going with the acrylic glazing liquid with just a touch of the zinc white for this light, because it has all of the qualities I want it to have in something that's transparent and covering the background only a little bit. Back to my actual canvas, I'm going to go ahead and start to sketch some things in. Now this part of the game is kind of like underwater office-y, so all of my lines are something that's been built by a person. They're very straight, they're very square, they're very mathematical, so I want to make sure they're all nice and perfect. Now they're going to be kind of blurred out through the water, so they're not as important as the front, but I still want to make sure my lines are straight or it's going to look strange. The best thing about using chalk pastels is if you don't like what you've done, you can just grab a damp towel and erase it. Having drawn everything once already, I think I realized my problem with it. I feel like everything really needs to be in one point perspective, even though it's all slanted, which means my horizon line is going to be at an angle instead of straight left and right. So what I'm going to do is use this one point, and it's going to be behind that one column I had before, and just kind of treat everything as if I'm doing it in one point. So I'm using all the rules, using a ruler, and making sure everything is straight and lined up. I redrew this and I'm really happy with how it looks now. So what I'm going to do is start filling things in, and now I need to work quickly because when my paints are wet I can kind of blend them a bit better and it'll give it a blurry effect because it's supposed to be underwater and kind of far away from our foreground. So I do want everything to be kind of blurred out. So I'm going to mix up a gray and then I'm going to add some blue into it so it's all slightly blue, and then we'll get painting. I've mixed up background colors and all they are ultramarine blue, Mars black, and then titanium white. The darkest color doesn't have any white in it, but the rest of them do. So I'm just going to kind of use these three colors to kind of fill in this background. Now, like I said, I want to make sure that it's blurred in the background, so I'm going to kind of work quickly so I can kind of blend my colors like as they overlap. My background is done, so it's time to start drawing in some of the foreground things. Now, I drew in the circle tracing it from my tape, and I really highly suggest if you can trace a circle ever, you should, because you want it to be perfect, and if it's not going to look like a good circle, so you might as well trace it. There's no harm in that. So I'm just going to go ahead and put some of these details on. I want to make sure that it points up this way because I do want to put the monster mermaid girl up here, and I do want it to kind of be looking, which is the mistake I made in my sketch. I didn't really think about that before, but I'm glad I caught it then because now when I go into my actual painting, I can go ahead and kind of fix that. With the submarine done, I can go ahead and kind of fill in my light beam. Now it's very much going to depend on how I drew this and at what angle, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of trace it in where I line up the edge of the light and kind of make this triangle essentially bigger. And if I don't like it, because it's chalk, I'll just go ahead and kind of erase it and then just redraw it where I want it to go. To help myself, I did draw her in like just kind of really roughly just to see, and I think that definitely helped me place where the light beam should go. So now I can kind of erase her, at least my little stick drawing of her, and then go ahead and draw her in too. Once I'm happy with the drawing, I can go ahead and start painting, and I'm using a carbon black for the submarine because this was Mars black with some ultramarine blue, so it's a bit lighter and the carbon black is a bit cooler, so I think it'll work well and let this stand out from the background. Now I'm not 100% happy with everything in the drawing yet. I think the boy and then the girl need some work yet, but if I go ahead and start doing some of the painting, I can erase him pretty easy and not erase the parts I like, so that's going to help me out. For the front part of the light, it's the brightest part of the entire painting, so I'm just going to use some pure white for that and just kind of fill this space in. To fill in the front window of the submarine, I'm just going to use some of these same background colors to do so. On the right side, it's going to even be a bit lighter because if I use this, you won't be able to see it. So I mixed up some of the titanium white with this lighter color, and that's going to kind of sit on the outside of this lens. I finished drawing the inside of the submarine again, so now I'm just filling it in, and the color I'm using is some of the stuff from the background, but it's kind of a mix between here and here, so it's kind of somewhere in here. I didn't want it to kind of contrast with what's going on in this far window, so it's somewhere kind of in between, so it's not one or the other. I added a little bit of a highlight onto his hand and like the controller, just because there is a little bit that gets reflected inside there. Now, the boy's shirt is red, so I kind of took my darker color I have here and mixed a little bit of cadmium into it. So this is going to be the main color I have for his shirt. And then I still have some cadmium on my palette that I can use to kind of do the same thing with the highlight, but with the cadmium. The final touch for the window is just kind of a highlight around it because it's kind of glowing from the inside and it's getting kind of the ring on the front. It should also get the ring on the side. It took a while, but I finally got his face right. And then I went back to the monster girl and I realized I didn't quite like how her body was shaped. I kind of wanted her to be blocking the light more with like the rest of her body, so I redrew her until I was happy. Now the next thing I need to do, I was going to fill in her hair, and I'm going to be using the liquid black for that because at the very end there's just a couple of tiny little strands. And I have a harder time using the thick paint to kind of make nice, fine, delicate things, and I can do it a lot better with the liquid paint. I'm really happy with how her hair turned out. It waves really nicely in the water, but I feel like it's very, very flat. So I think I'm going to give it a little bit of highlights with some more of my background gray colors, and just kind of in the front here where the light would hit, just kind of do a little bit of detail. To fill in her body, I think I'm going to start with the smaller parts first. By that I mean her face, her back arm, and her back leg. Because these three pieces are kind of disconnected from the rest of her by being cut off by the rest of her body, I should probably do those first because they're small chunks and I can kind of figure out what I'm doing before I move on to the big chunk. And that's the hard one because I need it to be smooth and connected, not in pieces. So if I do the little ones first, it should be a bit more successful for me. Now I'm going to use some of these same colors I had on the inside of the submarine to kind of start to fill it in. And then I'm going to use some lights and some darks to kind of give it value. Now because she is in the light, there's a lot more extreme value on her than in the rest of the painting. Because if you think about the light source here being pure titanium white, it's kind of shining that pure titanium white onto her body. So the parts that get hit by the light first should be super, super bright. To fill in the body, there's some things I'm thinking about, mainly my light source. This is so extreme that I have to think about the shadows that get cast. Her arm is casting a shadow on her cheek and neck here, and then the light itself is kind of making her forehead a bit lighter where it's just kind of catching the top of it. Now for the colors I'm using the same colors as my background. Because it's underwater, everything kind of gets that same hue because the water is affecting the color of everything, which is why the boy's shirt isn't bright, bright red. So I'm using this mid-tone kind of as the main thing for her body. And this is ultramarine blue, titanium white, and Mars black. I always do swatches in my sketchbook so I can kind of remember how I made a color, what exactly it is, so when I go and I have to mix it again, I have it right here to test against. So this is my main color. I'm using this as my shadows, which is the same color up here. And then this is my highlight, but in some instances, like on the very tip of her forehead, it's not bright enough, so I'm just adding a little bit more white to it. But these are my main colors for the body. It's just the shadows on them are going to be a lot more extreme than anything else. I'm beginning to fill in the rest of her body, and I figured I'd start at her hand because I figure that's probably the toughest part. Now I'm kind of using my own body sometimes to make sure things are right. I'm using my own hand to kind of see maybe how she would have her hand turned in front of her to block light. I could maybe do it this way, but that's kind of unnatural, so I think that maybe my hand should be more this way to block the light. So sometimes I do that to make sure things are right, and it kind of helps me figure out where things should be. Now they do sell drawing models, the wooden mannequins, and they also have ones for hands, so you can kind of pose hands any way you want and then use the wooden mannequin to draw it. I finished painting the monster girl, or boy, they don't really say, but I think the hair just makes me think girl. And I need to let it dry before I do the next step, which is kind of filling in this light source. But I don't want her to smear, and I'm going to be doing some taping with some of my painter's tape, and I don't want to peel any of it up, so I need to make sure it dries. But in the meantime, I thought I'd talk about why I decided to paint inside. Now, Steven and I played Limbo over on his channel, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do a Limbo painting. So I did a Limbo painting, and then we did inside, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to do an inside painting. In fact, there's a few scenes in inside I was just in love with, and I'd love to paint someday. But this one in particular really stuck out to me. I think it was the extreme lighting and kind of the desolation of it. So I really had to paint it, and here we are. With this much done, I'm going to go back to my canvas board I had in the beginning of the video, and if you remember, I had talked about how I liked the glazing liquid best. Now, just in case, I'm going to go ahead and kind of paint some more over here and retest the glazing liquid just to be sure everything's set before I put it on the canvas. I'm doing a few things with this practice. I'm taping off the bottom part of the light source just to see if I like the look of a harsh line better, or if I like the look of a soft line up here, which is what I'm going to do with just my brush. I also kind of drew in the figure again just to see if I could try and work around it, or if I'm going to have to kind of paint over it, or if I'm going to have to tape it off. So I'm going to try to work around it because I don't want to tape it off and I don't want to paint over it. So I'm just going to mix up some more of the acrylic glazing liquid and try painting this in. Between the top and the bottom where I had the tape, I think I like the top better. The bottom, the line is nice and perfectly straight, but it's too straight, and the paint is kind of collecting slightly above my line where it's just a bit brighter right there, and I don't like how that looks. So I think I'm going to do it without the tape. So the next step is to go ahead and do it on the actual canvas. Like I said, my actual canvas isn't as textured as that board because I've painted over it so many times just to test things out. So I don't expect there to be any problems with this kind of like clumping together and making too bright of a spot. So I'm just going to add a little bit to my brush and get started. I've done 3 coats of this mixture and I don't think it's bright enough, so I remixed it up with more zinc white so it's brighter, and I'm just going to apply this and see if it works. While I'm waiting on this to dry, I think I might add more detail to the submarine. It's kind of flat and I'm not liking how it looks. Now there's some detail around this front porthole and I like how that looks, but the rest of it's getting kind of flat. So I think I might bring what I've done here into the rest of it. This isn't getting bright enough for me, so I think I'm going to move to doing just pure paint instead of doing a mix with the glazing liquid. Now I'm going to be using the zinc white and the fluid acrylic, which is kind of the consistency of sour cream or yogurt or something like that. So it's kind of liquid, but it's not quite that heavy body paint I normally use. As long as I use a soft brush and I'm very careful, it should kind of go in a smooth consistency and not get streaky. The brightness of this has really helped bring it together, but the last thing I want to do is add some particle effects in the water, and I need to do that by taping off the space first so I don't get any of the particles anywhere else, and then we'll start adding them. To put in the particles, I'm doing the same thing I do with stars. I'm using the high flow titanium white and a toothbrush and just kind of splattering them on. Now I've kind of protected everything, but I was scared of taping over the monster because she's still kind of wet and I didn't want the tape to kind of pull the paint away. So I'm just going to be using an extra sheet of paper and kind of trying to cover her as I do that. And we're done! We have an underwater scene from inside. If you're interested in this piece, you could buy a print or a poster or bid on this original canvas. There's links down below. Also, consider supporting me on Patreon. You can find out more at supportmal.com. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of MalMakes, and I'll see you again here for another video game painting.